2 weeks ago, I posed the question, when did Victoria elect a totalitarian leader? And people jumped up and thought I'd overreach with that particular call. Yesterday, the long-awaited announcement of the Premier's roadmap out of our current restrictions affirmed once and for all that Victoria is under totalitarian rule and Daniel Andrews is a bona fide dictator. We asked for a roadmap out of the stage 4 lockdown, and what did we get? Yesterday, the Premier made the parade of dictators in history proud. His roadmap to nowhere is not a roadmap of hope, but it's more a 5-step proclamation of greater control which will lead us to an epic disaster. It's the lockdown dressed in different clothing. If Victorians and businesses were actually pinning their hopes on a way forward to a new norm, then Daniel Andrews obliterated all those hopes yesterday. He really did. Daniel Andrews has shown a ruthless and a callous disregard for the lives and well-being of all Victorians. And regardless of him fronting the media, as he's done daily for months, patronising us with his "it's all about saving lives" mantra, what he's actually delivering is the complete antithesis. It's not about whether we like him or whether we don't like him. It's not whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. It's more that he assassinated any hope of a return to freedom for Victorians. He also ensured that the mental health of Victorians and the rate of suicide will reach new and dangerous levels. Now, if that's the Premier's way of saving Victorians, then his perverseness is disturbing. Daniel Andrews has disregarded and disrespected Victorians for months. And he's also connived his way to obtaining power never sought before by a Premier. Indeed, his megalomania is being fueled by an ego that knows that he can do just about whatever he likes unchallenged. And the minor parties in the Parliament have been complicit in what must be the greatest act of bastardry ever effected on Victoria and Victorians. And they should hang their heads in shame. Because rather than demanding more scrutiny of the government, what they've actually done is they've given him carte blanche. It seems that Victoria's current plight will never end. And it's apparent the Premier doesn't want it to either. Premier Andrews understands that while he controls the levers of power the way he does, he remains right where he likes to be, very much in the spotlight. And we are the audience. His so-called roadmap, this map of the way out of our current restriction and lockdown, is more a 5-step document of unforgiving delusion. It really is. It's elimination now that he's talking about, not suppression. Reinforcing the ignorance and the narrative that the government has adopted since May. Now, at TheInformer, we've said repeatedly the Premier has failed Victorians, and he's done it by making a litany of mistakes through poor judgment, through knee-jerk reactions, arrogance and hubris. His staged roadmap is a further demonstration of all of that, and so much more. Does the Premier know where he's taking Victoria? Or even does he know what he's doing? What's evident is it's an unrealistic roadmap that won't be achieved because the detail in the plan sets our expectations way too high. It's madness. And the madness surrounds just how he expects the easing of restrictions to take place and move us from his stage 3+ model to stage 2. And then from stage 2 to 1 before he finally opens the community. Before we reach stage 1 and then the opening, the numbers that he's asking for are almost impossible. There's no consideration being shown for the existence of COVID as a permanent fixture. What he's actually aiming for is the elimination of the virus. Now, I've said repeatedly, Daniel Andrews is receiving advice from a chief medical officer who's not only out of his depth, but more interested in his own celebrity. I think the time has come for Premier Andrews to call on the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, and ask for her assistance. The deceit perpetrated on Victorians is more a sleight of hand when he calls stage 4 minus stage 3 plus, then stay at home, and then he's added the curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 in the morning. Now, if we are to get from this stage 3 plus to stage 2, the average number of cases for consecutive days of the lockdown must be less than 5, with less than 3 cases of an unknown source in the last 14 days. And then to move from stage 2 to stage 1, it must be no new cases for 2 weeks. And then to achieve that final stage of opening, we must see no active cases for 28 days. Now, as of yesterday, think about this. A comparative analysis with New South Wales shows that New South Wales is functioning close to normal with 10 new cases. Now, based on those figures, Victoria will not move from stage 3 plus to 2 until a vaccine is found. Premier, New South Wales is actually living with the COVID-19 contagion. It's actually functioning. What is it that you're failing to understand? And more importantly, what's your end game? What is this all about, Premier? Because from where everyone in Victoria is sitting, the desperate cries of business owners to reopen business, to actually get things going, is growing louder and louder. The anguish, the despair that you're creating in the state is reaching more and more people. Add to that the lives that you're continuing to ruin, the further decimation of the economy, and the failure or refusal to release the rate of suicides. Now, this refusal to even address it is infuriating. And we're told that the rate is comparable to this time last year. I'm in disbelief. Make no mistake about it. Domestic violence rates and mental health is skyrocketing. And the list of problems goes on and on. You have become the architect of Victoria's death. You're actually killing its economy like never before. You're hurting Victoria's social fabric. You're overseeing the decimation of people's livelihoods. And you're actually helping to destroy the once prosperous Victoria, the one that we've spent decades building, with your stubborn inability to provide any hope. Yesterday, Premier, you had a chance. You were asked about the comparative cases between New South Wales and Victoria, and to highlight just how incompetent your expert medical advisors are is detailed in the response of Mr. Cheng at the press conference. He said the comparison to New South Wales, where the lockdown is not as severe, was not helpful, as New South Wales had not experienced the high numbers that Victoria had. Mr. Cheng then added, New South Wales isn't the same place. There haven't been more than 13 cases a day in New South Wales since early August. And we're not even close to that number. I think it's disturbing, Premier, that the very people that you're relying on for expert advice appear incapable of getting their facts right. The simple task of research has obviously failed Mr. Cheng. Had he bothered to refer to the New South Wales Health website, he would have discovered that on the 11th of August, New South Wales recorded 22 new cases of COVID. That's almost double what Mr. Cheng had alluded to. Raising the question once again, how do Victorians know the government's modelling is right? Premier, many questions remain unanswered. What Victorians really need is answers. They also need a real roadmap out of this misery and despair. You, though, continue to fail Victorians and Victoria. You've forfeited any right to be Premier. You appear incapable of leading us out of a disastrous mess that is of your own making. And more people are asking the question, who are you? They no longer trust you. You are treating us all as mugs. Premier, as things stand, you have become the lead horseman of the four who ride to the apocalypse. Victoria is dying. And every day it seems that you're simply just standing there on your soapbox, happy to hold court. I said it before, I'll say it again. It may well be time now for Scott Morrison to start behaving like a Prime Minister. Put an end to all this lunacy. Because if he doesn't, there'll be no return of confidence. And Melbourne will never again be able to lay claim to the title of the world's most livable city.